Hey, everybody. Welcome back to The Collective. We have another fantastic show for you planned out today. We're going to be talking about a very interesting topic, and we're going to get into some neat examples of that right now. But before I do that, make sure you like the show, subscribe to the show itself, and then hit the notification bell as well. That way you get your email every time that we go live, which is, of course, every day. Now, if you guys have any questions or comments, by all means, put them in the comment section, and we will engage them directly. And other than that, let's get started. Any thoughts or questions before we dive into this? Everybody good?
No.
Okay. Let's dive in then. We have social pillars today, is what we're going to be talking about, based around social resiliency. So we're going to be kind of doing two pieces to this. The first part, I want to just kind of define what social resilience is, and then we can discuss how social pillars within societal groups apply to the resilience within the society, if that makes sense. So, social resilience is the capacity of individuals and groups to foster, engage in, and sustain positive social relationships and to endure and recover from stressors and social isolation, which I think is a very, broad way of putting it, but in my mind, it comes down to the ability to stay, for a community to stay connected while going through difficult time periods. Does that sound about right, Doc?
Sounds about right.
Okay.
It's really the community effort, right?
Yeah. And so I wanted to get your guys' thoughts. What are your initial thoughts on social resilience when you hear those words? Allie, I'm going to start with you.
Oh
So,
boy.
what do you think?
Right in the hot seat.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is something I'm sure I'm going to learn a lot as we're talking, but something that kind of comes to mind as social resilience is it's almost also an individual resilience, and when someone sees someone else in their community kind of, rising up and pulling other people up and being super supportive and positive, that has a ripple effect, and I think then spreads out towards the community. So that was my kind of first thought, is it is in itself an individual practice that then leads to the social group as well, if that sort of makes sense.
Yeah, I like that.
Hopefully.
Doc, what do you think?
Well, I have to make things complicated. You know that, Chance. So let's go ahead and start making things complicated. So, social resilience, there's so many different factors I'm looking at. Looking at the community, families, how they are. Culture is going to play a big role. Religion can play a big role. I'm going to throw probably I won't throw half a dozen at you, but I'll throw a few examples that come to my mind right now. The challenges the Mormons had over 150 years ago in a massacre that they suffered. I think it was in Utah, I
Mm-hmm.
believe, about 150 years ago, and how that community had to come together. Native Americans and a lot of their nations that have had to deal with issues as well. They had to come together. Um, you have different types of scenarios. Well, I won't bring that one up because I'm not sure. I had to think about that one a little more. There's a lot of different scenarios like communities that have to bind together for tragedies such as Lahaina and Maui. We were talking about that before the show.
Mm-hmm.
They got decimated. I have friends there who lost their home. A friend of mine who's a chiropractor lost his home as well as his practice. They're staying at a hotel now, and he's been living there for 30 years. So that community now has to join together, and not only to rebuild, but also to fight against other people who are exploiting it. There's looters now going around and doing things, so they have to come together to fight that. And I think there is a thing of social resilience, and social psychology talks a lot about it. It's just as strong as individual resilience. And a lot of it, though, I believe, and I'm sure we'll get into this discussion too, is it comes into the values and social mores of that community and the family. And I think religion can play a big role. As I mentioned, the Mormons, and there's others as well that join together against um, tragedies that have happened against their particular religion. So there's all of them have been persecuted in one way or another. So that's a long-winded answer for that,
Yeah,
but there you go.
It makes a lot of sense. Shaun, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think that much like yesterday, kind of got to look at it. I kind of have to look at it from an internal perspective and an external perspective. So yesterday we talked about spirit or spiritual strength, and I think you've got to
Emotional strength yesterday.
Sorry, emotional. That was Monday. Sorry.
Yeah.
And Monday it was the same aspect as well of understand your internal aspect and understand the externality of the world around you and how that fits into your own internal model, or how your internal model plays well with the externality of the world. So Monday and Tuesday were that theme for me, and today is that theme for me. You got to figure out your internal aspect, and you got to figure out your internal aspect in the sense of what your social model is and how you fit into the social model around you. And so, looking at the Lahaina incident as an example, it's actually a really good case study for what I see happening in the entire world to some degree, or in small groups, or in provinces, or in towns, or in clubs. It doesn't much matter what kind of unit we're talking about. If the unit is just kind of forming up, let's call it a veteran movement across Canada. That'll help establish a little bit better definition. If that veteran group is establishing itself over the last few weeks, and it's new to the game of establishing its social identity, its social culture, its social understanding of how it fits into the social sphere all around it, well, good luck, because most of the veterans that are stepping into that social group haven't spent the time to figure themselves out. So they haven't done any internal understanding of what their social strength is, or what they stand for, or what they represent, or how best to represent themselves, we'll call it. Now they're stepping into an organization that is just newly forming up, and itself is unsure of what its identity is within the grander world around it. And so I think that your social strength, for lack of a better term, needs to come internally first, rather than not understanding what you have to offer internally and then stepping out into an external organization and hoping that it's going to understand how you think and how you work and how you feel and how your social strengths will play in that group. In other words, get to work on yourself before you step into another external group and count on that to do the work for you.
That's an interesting point. The the delineation between the internal versus the external, I think, is quite fascinating. Doc, you got any thoughts on internal versus external?
Sorry, I got to cut in, Doc.
Okay.
My bad. It was about a 3/4 formed or completed statement, because I'd mentioned Lahaina, and what I'd failed to do is tie that into the topic, which is, so internally you can have a lot of things figured out. You can be socially strong. You can have the strength to operate within the social world, as it were. But not everyone does, nor does every group. And so, there's always going to be, let's refer back to that same veteran group that's forming up. There's going to be people who are going to enter that group to take advantage of the situation, that are going to exploit any weaknesses, that are going to take advantage because they're the center of their own little universe. They don't know how to play with the external social fabric. They only understand barely their own internal social fabric. And so the Lahaina incident right now, what we're seeing is people who play well together because they understand what's important, and people who don't play well with other groups because they only consider themselves as the only thing that's important in this world. Now, of course, it's complicated. It's not as one-dimensional as he's a bad guy stepping into a group that's trying to do well, and et cetera, because that bad guy might be trying to feed his family. And then it gets kind of murky. And so, though it's criminal actions maybe, or maybe it's non-ethical actions, the individual's doing it almost for good reasons. But again, that gets a little murky, so I'll leave it there.
That definitely muddies the waters a little bit, for sure. Doc, you got any thoughts?
Yeah, it reminds me when Shaun said that, because it's a classic philosophy example that they use for justice and what's right and wrong, morality. And one of the examples they give is, you probably heard the story of the man whose wife is dying. She needs medication. He can't afford it. So he goes to the pharmacist to ask for a deal. The pharmacist says, no way. I'm paraphrasing. And then he ends up stealing the medication. And then they ask people, is it right or wrong? because of his motive and his intention to do it. And it's a complicated question. But I'll take it back. It reminds me of a lot of different group settings. And again, I'll bring it to special forces. I'll bring it back to sports, where you have to join together to overcome odds and challenges in your life. In special forces, the ODA, you have 12, and you have people who specialize in different areas. And it kind of reminds me of Lahaina. You're going to have to get people together who know about plumbing, people who know how to build things, people who know how to arrange things, coordinate, medical care, whatever it is. You're going to have these specialists that have to coordinate together. And it takes a lot of effort and a lot of work. You have to put egos aside. But there's something really powerful about that when you have that community that can bond like that. We see it a lot in rural areas, sometimes in suburban areas. They will bond. They'll protect their neighbors. We've seen that with community watch. A lot of studies have shown how powerful that can be. A lot of people, burglars, not a lot of people, but a lot of burglars or robbers will know this is not the neighborhood to mess around with if there's a lot of people who are going to be supportive of each other and be watching out. There's actually a theory in criminology called collective efficacy, which shows when people join together, say something when you see something, things of that nature, it's a much safer community, a much more bonded community. I don't know about you, 'cause I don't know much about Canada, unfortunately, but I know when I ask around here, students and people, and I say, hey, how many people here know your neighbors? You get about half who raise their hands, and I say, well, how many of you talk to your neighbors more than 2 hours a year? And then it drops down about 20%. How many people have ever gone to dinner with your neighbor? Then it goes down like to 5%. And this isn't a knock, but you can see something's happening, right? There's something going on. Something is missing in some of these neighborhoods where if you have an event and there's nobody around that you can call, that's going to be scary sometimes if you can't do it on your own. So social resilience definitely has a place. I'm a baseball fan. I know not everybody is, but I love it. And everybody has to play together. And a classic example, I know I'm going to get blowback for this from somebody, but when Barry Bonds was having his record year, independent of the roids, when he was having his record year, when he left, the Giants won. And everybody was completely blown away because they're thinking, wait a minute, this guy was hitting 100,000 home runs every season, and now he's gone. We're never going to make it. And then they made it. And you can see how powerful it was when they got together. And it wasn't solely based, I'm not knocking Bonds on this, but when it was solely based on when it was solely based on him, it was a different ballgame. No pun intended. I think I went over my 2 minutes. I try to keep it brief.
All good. Allie, what do you think? What do you got going on?
Yeah, I think it's pretty true. Like, just like Dr. C was saying, yeah, we know our neighbors on both sides here, but I don't have their phone numbers. So if there was an emergency, I would have to go over to their house and knock on their door. And I would, because they're friendly people, and I would ask for their help, and I think I'd get it, but I don't have their phone numbers, and we've never had dinner with them. So it's interesting community, because the first thing that almost pops to my mind is not even my physical community here, but our online community is really strong right now. The bonds that we're kind of creating, honestly, through Instagram and just what we've been doing. And so that community is a total different ballgame as well. Like, I talk to lots of people almost daily and check in with people, and have been sharing more with almost virtual strangers because I've never met them in real life yet. But I would say that our social community is really strong, and I feel like I've got a lot of trust there. And we have a great community and family here as well that we do spend lots of time with as well. But it's interesting just to kind of think about the differences with that as well, and just as we move forward with technology and everything too.
Yeah, it's the online community is quite interesting, and to those that are watching, by all means, I want to hear what your thoughts are on societal resilience. So make sure you put them in the comments here. I'm going to kind of get into social pillars, unless you got some extra thoughts there, Shaun. You got anything extra thrown?
Well, I do, but we'd need several hours, so let's keep on keeping on.
Okay, so Doc C brought up a really great point in the idea of the paragon versus the pillars, and at least this is the way I read into it, was the fact that you have Barry Bonds kind of holding up the team. You have the one star player on the team, and he's keeping the team at a level, but without them working together, that they're not going to reach their maximum ability. And that's where, more support, more pillars in general is better than one singular pillar in the center of an object. And so I'm wondering what your guys' thoughts are on, the people that step up in times of tragedy, right? Where you see down in Hawaii right now, leaders are stepping into roles as you were saying, Doc C, where you have, doctors and engineers and project managers and people who are just like, okay, I have a skill set. Come to me. I'll do what I can. And they're the ones that kind of prop up that societal resilience more so in a whole, at least in my mind. I find that the people that are willing to step up during tragedies kind of maintain that resilience. What do you guys think on that? I'm going to go with Shaun first while you're drinking your coffee.
Well, I was hoping you'd choose me first. So, what I find interesting about this, I was trying to figure out how to communicate it right from the get go. I failed miserably on my last effort, and I'm going to make a bit of a better effort. And so, social pillars. Why is it that, just as you said, Chance, we as humans step up in the tragedies to see if we can lead through the tragedy? Why not test out a little bit of social leadership before the tragedy occurs? Why not create social leaders before we have to look around in a panic looking for leaders? And so I think that the Lahaina incident is a great example of generally how it works. Something goes sideways and people look around in the blur, and someone puts their hand up and volunteers and hopes that they can do a good job. It doesn't have to be that way. You can create leadership within social groups, just like we have on Instagram, as it were, just as Ali stated. I think that it might not be a massive group, but there's a pretty decent sized group of people getting together on Instagram right now that are friends and acquaintances and have met through the social medium. And they are starting to form leadership roles within the group. They are starting to understand how to deal with not adversity on a massive scale, but adversity within their own life, which I think plays out into adversity out there in the larger world around them. And so, as a social medium, Instagram, if we can create leaders who are used to working through their own internal problems that also play out into the large world, then I think we're creating a solution before the problem shows up. Why I think it wasn't done very well before is, to your point, Chance, the paragon that steps in, like a Barry Bonds as an example. I don't know how well that team was playing before Barry Bonds showed up, but I'm assuming that when he did show up, things changed in whatever fashion. And I don't know how, because I'm not a baseball guy. But the paragon, we'll call him Barry Bonds, moved that team towards, we'll call it greatness. And then he left. So who cares? I don't care if he left. What he left behind is what's important. And the delta between when he showed up and when he left is what's important. It's not about he's gone and now there's a massive hole in the team. The team is the team. The team learned 1000% more with him being there. And when he left, it didn't get 1000% dumber. The leadership is still in place when the leader leaves, the paragon leaves. So I think that in a social environment, when paragons, again, for lack of a better term, step in and start helping to shape things, once it's starting to shape up, the paragon can disappear, I feel. And the rest should take care of itself based on the leadership, and the adversity that the team has faced can then just auto-magically take over, as it were.
Interesting. Doc,
I mean, that's
thoughts?
simplistic. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, but
Yeah. There's a bit deeper of or
yeah.
more complicated than that. But what do you think, Doc?
I'm going to kick it. I think Sean's right. I'm going to kick it over before Ali mentions. I like this topic a little bit about social media and the community that's being developed there, because there are some communities that are developed. I see your community, obviously, that everybody's joining together, supporting each other. I see a lot of the likes and comments on Satch's journey through the 22 marathons, and I see everybody there rooting and supporting him. And that helps with resilience. I've seen people who sometimes will share things that have gone bad for them, something that may happen in their life, and see people comment and wish them condolences or hopes things get better, and there's some support there. So social media is fascinating in that way to some degree. I know in mental health it's really powerful when it comes to group settings. To have a social group, we see it a lot with almost, well, I can't say every institution, but a lot of the religious institutions. There's a lot of groups, Bible studies, Havaras for the Jewish community. There's a lot of ways to bond with individuals. And it's really fascinating to see how human beings gravitate towards that need. Because resilience not only in overcoming material disasters or natural disasters like Lahaina, but also psychological issues, divorce groups, 12-step groups, whether you like them or not. They have that philosophy again of that group. So I think it's interesting to see these little resilient groups that get built for the community. Not sure why I went with that, but I like it.
Shaun, what do you got?
I do. Just there is another little piece to that as well. And Doc, I know you understand this, of course. And I'm thinking of Ali specifically, Ali and Dave from Ruck and Rise podcast as a perfect case study as to how this all plays out as a overarching theme anyway. Someone or a small group will look out to the interwebs or out to the social sphere outside of themselves and consider what they want to align with, what makes them feel like they're growing as a human, what feels like a positive trajectory for them. And they'll start tracking it and they'll start getting involved in it. And at some point, because they're now collaborating with that group, they become empowered. They feel an empowerment. And it might start off tiny, just a tiny bit that they don't even recognize it in themselves, but it just changes the way they run their program. Eventually, they recognize that they're feeling empowered, whatever that means to them. And then maybe they kick off a podcast. Maybe they start a brand spanking new podcast trying to do good in the world because they have collaborated and they are now empowered to work either within the group or on the edge of the group or start a new group that plays well with the first group that they were in. And as I see it, that's how a single social pillar is built out into multi-pillars, as it were. And that's how you keep the roof up,
Interesting. Ali, got any thoughts on any of that?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And something else I was going to go back to that Shaun said a couple minutes ago about how, oh my God, now I'm losing my train of thought. About how we are kind of creating, or why can't we create the leaders before the tragedy happens? And I agree that that should happen. And I think there's people working towards that too. But also on the flip side of that is sometimes it takes a tragedy or something traumatic to happen for it kind of changes something in an individual or person to kind of light up the fire in them, or switch the flip the switch, or whatever you want to call it, where it's like all of a sudden they're looking around and they're thinking, now's my time, I gotta step up because it touched them, and they're the ones who are going to become a leader in the trauma or because of the trauma or whatever. So there's lots of different ways to do it, but I definitely agree that doing it beforehand is also important.
That's a great point. In that, I love the idea in that sometimes it actually takes the tragedy to either, lack of a better term, knock some sense into you, or show you that you're not invincible. This is one of the things. Yeah, that's fantastic. Shaun, you got any thoughts on that?
No, I agree with Ali. I think that there's many ways to talk about this subject, whether you are always in the game or whether you get knocked into the game. I suppose it doesn't matter. Once you're in the game, you're in the game. And the other piece, I suppose, which is not that positive, is not everyone can stay in the game. They're an in and out. It's a little bit of a guerrilla warfare. They go in, they solve the problem, then they bounce because it's either too much for them, or it wasn't their plan, or this is so inconvenient. I'll do my best and then I'm bouncing. So there's lots of different ways that it can all play out in respect to a social group. But that is different. The things that I just described there, that is different than the social person within yourself. That if you're using those phrases like I'm just going to go in, I'm going to do a little bit of this, and then I'm going to bounce, that is not the language that you use internally. The internal language on that is way different than when you're talking about interacting with a social group, as it were. I hope that makes sense.
Interesting. I got a couple comments here, but Doc, you got any points on what Shaun just said?
What Ali said was interesting. 'Cause it reminded me of a social example a lot of times that we see. How many people here talk to people in the elevator when they don't know them, but then the elevator gets stuck on the 19th floor? You get to know everybody pretty well. And you're getting into that, not a big tragedy, but yet, so for some people, it could be significant if they have claustrophobia, they're afraid of heights, whatever it may be, depending on the type of elevator. But it's interesting how certain events have to happen to motivate us just to simply talk to each other sometimes. It is interesting. I threw that there.
That is interesting. Any thoughts on that before I hit these comments, Ali? Or no? Good. Okay. So Dave jumps in. He's watching from the other room. He says, just watched a video on social media from Lahaina where strangers were jumping into the ocean to help and save others, calling one another ohana, which means family. One more example on this topic, which is 100% true. I mean, we saw this, the Humboldt crash in here in Alberta, or the fires in BC right now. I mean, we see this quite regularly with the amount of social support based around, one of the great ones, a great example that just popped in my head was Boston Strong. That whole strong movement after the bombing spread out across all over the US, all over Canada, it's now a pretty common phrase to say something strong whenever a tragedy strikes. So I'm wondering, how much do you think that plays into it in finding maybe the right rallying cry to get people to be part of the society, or do you think that it's more of a individual drive? Doc, what do you think?
I forgot that one. So you're trying to say what would it take to motivate them? I think it's a little bit of both. I'm not going to say it's just one. I think they're not independent silos. They probably work together. It's going to be, some people are going to be more motivated to work with groups. Some people are going to have a certain time in life. Context plays always a big role. I've seen it a lot with people who get divorced. That's going to be very motivating sometimes to join groups because now they feel alone. For those who are dating, you know what that happens when you get the dreaded call, hey, we got to talk. And then all of a sudden your life ends when you're with that person 24/7, 4 or 5 days a week. What do you do on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday nights? That becomes a motivating factor to join groups, to develop resilience for your own life during those times of toughness. Is when all of a sudden your friends can come back in. And some people are different. Some people will still associate with their friends when they're dating, but other times they'll separate a little bit. And it happens to married couples as well. So I think it takes a little bit of both. I think it depends on the context of the situation can drive it, where the person's at in their life can drive it, and all the above.
Multifactorial. I like it.
Yeah,
Ali, what do you think?
I agree. I have nothing to add.
Okay. Shaun, any thoughts?
I think that it's a really valid point, and I think it comes down to what I had in mind when the collective. I mean, holy moly! Just think of the term, the collective. Could it be more social than that? Could we use a title to create more social resilience? I name another title than the collective that represents what we're talking about. I don't know, just a thought. So when I was thinking about the collective way back in the day before it was kind of a thing, I was trying to figure out how to solve the puzzle of why it's failed sometimes in the past, or these things called the collectives, why it's failed over the last 10 or 20 years within the veteran community, as it were. And I think one of the reasons that sometimes it fails to create cohesion, or to create common ground, or to create a growing community. I think it becomes a little too incestuous. And what I mean by that is the group starts off small with the best of intentions, but it's really comfortable hanging out with its own kind. So all of a sudden, if I start a group, I'm hanging out with 100 other Shauns, and we're telling each other the same thing and hearing the same thing all the time. We're not challenging our fixed mindset through diversity and inclusion. And so with the collective, when people were saying, well, who is it and who's it going to be? Just a bunch of your army goof friends? Literally, someone said that to me. And I said, I don't know, I'll figure it out. But I knew that from the get-go, I wanted to have, farm hands and doctors and house moms and house dads and all of the stuff, all the way from the highest of the high to the lowest of the low, whatever that means to someone out there, the entire swath of socioeconomic demographic from the left to the right. I really wanted a diverse group of people in order to create growth mindset and to protect against the common failure, as I see it, of a one-dimensional approach. It's kind of like, if I'll use it anyway. It's kind of like when you get a bug, when you get a flu, we'll call it, and if your immune system is not well protected because you're not out there in the dirt, you're not eating dirty food, you're not drinking dirty water, you're not rolling in the dirt, well, your body doesn't have those natural immunity protection systems in place. If you grow up in a bubble, the moment that a casual breeze goes by with one tiny little flu bug in it, bam, now all of a sudden you're sick. But if you're rolling around in the dirt all the time, yeah, the flu doesn't really hit you too hard. And I think that's the way I look at the collective, not like a big dirty playground, but I'm saying I don't want it to be a one-dimensional, incestuous echo chamber. And so the growth mindset that we've got going on over here at the collective, because it is so diverse. I mean, geez, there's no way I ever thought I'd be talking to Allie, like a year ago. Who's Allie? And what does she do? You know what I mean? And so, but now I know Allie, and I know what she does, and I know what she brings to the table, and I know how valuable she is to the collective. And so the collective is a great, almost social experiment or a social case study of how to create social resilience through the diversity and inclusion that we're now encouraging.
I like that. Allie, you got any thoughts on that?
I do. No, I think that's brilliant. I have one side question. How long have you been thinking about doing the collective, Shaun, before it actually launched?
I couldn't put a precise date on it, but I can give you a generally precise period of time. And it was almost immediately after I finished the effort to push the Remembrance Day video campaign across Canada. So trying to encourage other veterans to just stand near their cenotaph or speak to someone in their legion or in some way reflect on what Remembrance Day means to them rather than what's happened in the past. It's the same old, same old. I was trying to figure out a way to connect the person to the moment with some sort of emotional connection, and therefore emotionally connect to other veterans, then emotionally connect to group, and hopefully emotionally connect Canada from left to right. Yeah, it was an effort, but I don't think it really ever moved the needle too much. So by the end of it, I was like, okay, well, that was decent, but we need more. And so it was over a period of a day or two that I sat down with a coffee and just thought, I got to change this game.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's,
and I think it's...
I didn't know what that
sorry.
meant. I didn't know what that meant. Like, these were ideas that weren't very well thought out. And to this date, right till now, the idea is still evolving, through Chance and I and the guests and our own Chance's ideas, my ideas, the guests' ideas, your ideas. It's evolving. Now, it doesn't feel like mine anymore. It was just my idea. It's not my path. It's now the collective's path.
Allie?
No, I love that because it's so true. I mean, it takes all sorts of people for us to actually be able to learn from each other. I mean, if we all did the exact same thing, you might learn a little bit, but your learning is going to be kind of stunted at a certain point. So I love that you guys bring people in from all over the place. And I've been listening to, I'm trying to get caught up on all your other episodes, but I try to listen to an episode a day. And the learning that has come from that, and just to have that available to anybody who wants to listen to it and to grow, and it's just incredible. I love it. I'm happy to be a part of it.
Do you know what the terrible part is for me? Is I'm embarrassed by a lot of the old episodes because I was still trying to figure out how to do this. Like I was stinking up the place. It's bad. It's really bad. I wish that the collective was a running experiment from kind of January 1st until about June 1st, and all of that disappears, and June 1st it actually kicks off, because then we were kind of like, we had a rhythm, we were doing better, I was comfortable, Chance was comfortable, the guests were comfortable, we kind of knew what we were doing. And so that's June to me is when the collective really became a thing. All the stuff prior, sometimes I like wince when I think about some of the stuff that I said anyway.
Yeah. It wasn't that bad.
No,
But in
there's
my
still-
head it is.
In your head, yeah. No, I get
Yeah.
it. I've done the same
I'm
thing. I've
critical.
looked at some
I'm
of the
very
old ones.
critical
Yeah.
of myself.
Well, it brings bringing it back to the point, social resilience, and being a social pillar. It's not always so much so that you want to change the world, right? I'm gonna hold up society. Yeah, it's you see a problem, or you see a hole, or you see something, and you're just like, I'm gonna try and fix that, and then you kind of have to see how that goes, because sometimes you're gonna hit a wall and just like, oh, I don't have the qualifications, I don't have the capability to understand the problem even to any depth, but you kind of will sit there and be like, I'll help. Somebody just tell me, like, I'll do what I can, which is an interesting part of it. But I think the idea of a social pillar is that they're not so much wandering around wanting to be a social pillar. It's not so, maybe almost thrust upon them in the situation. Or do you think that there is people that just want to be a pillar within society? Doc, I'm going to come to you with this one. What do you think?
It's interesting because it reminds me of the conversation. I don't know when we had it. But it reminds me of the hero's journey again. The individual who gets thrusted into a situation we see in all the movies. I got a quote that I think I can use it when Shaun was talking about. I'll get to it in a second. But yeah, I think it's that kind of the hero's journey. It's what it reminds me of. Some people are going to take it. They never wanted it. Now they're thrust into the moment, and here we go. And we see it a lot in movies. Die Hard. I'm aging myself on that one, but Rambo, things of that nature. Well, Rambo, no, take that one out. Die Hard. Some of the other ones that had these situations, Spider-Man, people who didn't want to do what they were called upon to do, but they had to because they were the only ones that could do it. I think other people strive in those situations and they know it, so they can take the bull by the horns, as the old saying goes, and they'll run with it. So again, it just depends on the person, depends on the context. You can put me in a certain situation and I may have no clue about what to do. For instance, if you put me in the outdoors and I'm stuck out there with Travis, I'm not jumping the lead. Travis is going to take the lead on that one. More than happy to give it to him. I'm not taking it. But the other quote reminded me of what Shaun was talking about. And I think this relates to the collective. And I think this is the humility between you and Shaun as well. Is if the quote, I don't know who said it because they're arguing about it, and social media has probably distorted whoever said it. It was, if you're the smartest person in the room, then you're in the wrong room. Probably heard that one before. And I think that's one of the things neat about you guys. You don't really worry about if somebody knows more about whatever topic it is. You just want to learn from it. That's, I think, is a great thing for everybody in society. That we shouldn't be intimidated just because somebody knows more or they're an expert in whatever it is, and that's the way it goes. I have no idea about cycling, and I would sit down any day with Shaun and tell me about this stuff. Does the foot placement really matter that much, Shaun? And I'm sure I'll get my ear chewed off because I said it, but at least I'll learn. But I'm humble enough to go ahead and admit that I don't know it.
That's a great point. Shaun, you got thought on this?
Well, I think that I do my best to demonstrate that I am a partial village idiot from time to time. I'm pretty smart, but there's a lot of things that I don't know. And more importantly, the things that I do know, some of them I haven't fully patternized yet. I'm still trying to figure out how to manipulate the model, as it were. And so, back to Ali's point on the collective and kind of maybe the inception of it, this is still the inception, if I'm being honest. I mean, it's still shaping up, it's still being molded, it's still being calibrated. Yesterday, Chance and I were, as we do on a pretty regular basis, we collaborated, I'll call it, and just shifted the direction to some degree. We're constantly tweaking the direction of the collective between Chance and I, and of course, our friends who are involved with the collective are giving us feedback on a fairly regular basis. It's very rare that it's critical feedback. It's usually really positive feedback, which positive feedback is not an environment that I thrive in. Where I thrive is in the critical analysis, the this is going sideways, let's get it fixed. Okay, good, that's where I like to be, fixing the sideways stuff. When it's going really well, I just kind of want to like turn in my badge and say, see y'all later. It looks like it's running pretty well now. I'm off to the next thing. So I suppose that is part of the social resilience, or the social pillar, the social strength is I I was taught to be comfortable in these kind of things. But once I get too comfortable, I'm looking for the next uncomfortable thing for me. And hopefully that uncomfortable thing is also uncomfortable for another group that I can then go not help, but get involved with to see how we can all as a team improve the world, as it were. I'm trying to improve my world. But in so doing, I'm trying to improve the world around me for sure. Not the big world, but the world of people that are involved in my world.
Mm-hmm. I got a couple good comments here I wanted to hit on, but Ali, got any thoughts on that?
Just one thing I wanted to say is that like the learning is so infectious, I find. And I used to have a different mindset when I was in my early 20s and finishing college and stuff like that. And it's sort of like, oh, I'm done school now. It's like, I'm done learning, which now saying that sounds so stupid, of course. But it's almost like you think in some ways, society kind of thinks school is learning and then you're done. But learning, it never stops. And I'm a totally different person now and I love learning and just want to chase after new dreams and learn as much as I can about all sorts of different topics that I before had limited interest in. So seeing everybody else learn, it has a ripple effect, I think, and other people kind of get interested and it does a lot of good.
Interesting. Doc, you got some thoughts on it before I hit these comments?
Yeah, it's funny because I agree with Ali and most of it, except for that ending part was interesting because it reminds me of the students. You have the ones that are passionate and sitting in their class, and then the other ones fiddling around with their phone and really just hoping that bell rings so they can get the heck out of Dodge. But I think she's right. I think most people are going to get motivated by other people learning, and they grow and they develop. You know, I guess my final thoughts later on as they get closer, I'm saving that up for the end.
Right.
Oh, big artillery strike at the end.
He's gonna bring it at the end there. So you got a thought?
I do have one more point, and it was based on what Ali just said, and the importance of, we'll call it the collective, but the collective is acting as a placeholder for social strength, social resilience, social within a social setting. And I think one of the failure points within a social sphere is the ability to communicate. And so one of the other little side projects within the collective is, right from the get-go, Chance and I had talked about it. We had some rules that we put in place, and that's no religion, no politics, no swearing, the no's of the world that we weren't going to tolerate over here. And it's not that we're so dead set against any of those things. It's just that I'm dead set against poor communication. And by stripping out the swearing as an example, guess what? That's a pattern interrupt that makes people reconsider how they're communicating, how they're talking with each other. The other aspect to it is when someone's talking, freaking be quiet. Just pay attention, see what you can learn from the person, and when it's your time to talk, then talk. Stop thinking about what you're going to say every single second, and listen instead of thinking about what you're going to say. Just listen. And so, as I've seen this evolve every single day since January 1, at the start, we weren't doing it that well. We were doing okay, but we weren't doing that well. We found our rhythm, though. And the rhythm has been in place for quite some time now. And anyone who's tuning in over here, or more importantly, I guess the proof is in the pudding, the guests at the end of this will say, man, you guys run your podcast way different than everyone. Like, you actually don't speak over top of each other. You actually listen to each other. The points that are being made are relevant and important within the group setting, and no one is trying to outdo each other. It's just a good, solid communication style that has been forgotten. And so part of strengthening up a social network is teaching it or relearning how to communicate effectively again. So that is one of the little side projects over here in the social aspect.
Yeah, 100%. It's being the change we want to see, right? And I think that's a big part of it. And it's going to go into my next point here. I do want to touch on these comments before we get too far. So I'm going to hit these right now. John Minari, I hope I pronounced that right. It says, we're essentially speaking of fight, flight, freeze. You can train and empower people to not freeze or flee. It's finding the right way to empower these peeps to stand up, which is going to go into what I have to say in here in a second. He carries on. He says, I do agree you have to watch the forming of little elite subcultures within the collective. I was at a certain event that was for first responders, and the elite hung amongst themselves mostly. And that's kind of goes into the concept of, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. But I heard this put differently, and I think, Shaun, you actually put it this way, is that if you're the smartest person in the room, you're looking at the room wrong. Because you should be able to learn something from anybody, from any room. Doesn't matter which room you're in, you should be able to engage in that room effectively. So the question that I have before I go into anything else is, or before we get into the final thoughts here, was how do we teach people to be social pillars outside of those tragic circumstances where they're required, right? Where, the one med student who's about to become a doctor in this small town that is destroyed, and the doctor's gone. Well, now he's the doctor, right? Or, they teach us in the military, when your section commander dies and you're the second in command, well, now you're the section commander. And you're just thrust into these positions. So how do we teach people to do that prior, or prepare themselves prior to the tragedies, let's say? Doc, what do you think?
I think it goes along the same lines we were talking about yesterday with emotional toughness. I think a lot of these things have to be taught early on. You can teach them later. We've seen that with special forces. We've seen that with other groups when they become teenagers. If you ever seen the Robbers Cave video, it's a 5-minute clip. I recommend it. I show it to every class I teach when I teach social psych. It's a fascinating 5-minute clip for anybody out there who's listening. It shows you how fast people can change, either against each other or for each other. I kept my mouth shut most of this podcast today about all the negatives that social groups can create. That's just because of the field that I hang out with. But I think little things, I guess this is my final point that I was going to bring up anyway, so it kind of ties in. You guys ever heard of Leo Buscaglia?
Yeah.
I have not.
Shaun, yeah, he was around a long time ago, I think in the 80s, and he was really big, and he was a professor of love at UCLA. But one of the big things that he was talking about was the importance of having family unity and bonding with your family, being able to be there for them. And this doesn't have to be a tragic event, like it's the tragedy over in Lahaina. It could be something as simple as somebody passing away in their family, or somebody failing an exam, or somebody not making a team, volleyball or soccer, whatever it may be, and pulling together and supporting that individual. And those individuals can learn from each other in that family. And it's really, another one is like in the Japanese culture, well, in some of the Asian cultures where they take care of their elderly, by coming together to be able to watch your parents, taking them in, and not putting them in a care home. This is going to be an explosive topic, so I'm not going to get too far because some people can't. I get it. But the individuals who can, you see this family unity a lot where they'll bring in their grandmas, their granddads, and you start developing that education and that skill set of working together as a team. So hopefully that all made sense, but that's kind of what I was looking at. It's always the beginning with the family. A lot of times you can teach them to work together, to help each other. Could be something as to one person silly, to another not, where I didn't make the soccer team. I didn't get the part I wanted in the play, but it really devastates them. And you bound together. You know what? We're going to go out to dinner tonight and celebrate that you tried 100% to make it. That silly little note could be it. Or they all put up balloons and a little note. Great try. Whatever it may be, but you come together during those moments.
Yeah. Can you hit us up with that clip name? What was the clip that
Robber's
we
Cave.
Oh,
Robber's Cave. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's like
Good.
5 minutes.
Awesome. I'll find it. I'll put it in the show notes so that people can link directly
Cool.
to it. Allie, any thoughts on that? The family unit?
I completely, yeah, agree. I think it starts at an early age, and I mean, we have kids. One of our kids is 20 and the other one is almost 7. So a lot of the things we're trying to instill in Josh, our youngest, now, making your bed, which isn't going that well, to be honest with you. It's a work in progress, but because that is gonna help define who they are when they're grown-ups, and that little stuff does matter. And he sees us out there, exercising and doing this different stuff in our community, and we try to involve him, especially now that he is almost 7 and he can understand a little bit more, because he's watching us, and it is going to make a big difference in his life. So I definitely agree. It starts with the family and then just spreads from there.
It's a very interesting thought too, because that's kind of your first team, right? The
Yeah.
family, and if that team succeeds together or fails together, then that leads into a greater feeling later on in life. Shaun, you got some thoughts?
Yeah, could you throw up John's last comment there, please?
Yep. There you go.
Cool. So I like it. It does start with the family, and if you're doing it well within your own household, then you can, as Doc said, someone fails to win the gymnastics competition or the whatever. When they get home, there's balloons, or they're taken out for dinner, they're made to feel better about the situation, etc. And that's bonding and validation and future casting. There's all kinds of things going on in that tiny little fraction of a moment. And if you understand how the world turns, then you'll see all of the things that are occurring in that moment. But if you don't understand it, then you just simply see it as a kid walking in the house, dragging their lip, and they get a pat on the head, and then you're on to the next thing, empty the dishwasher, as it were. And so it depends on how much you're paying attention to the social signals all around you. And then once you see those signals, how you interpret them and how you form the pattern about what actually happened in the moment, rather than the surface or the veneer level that is actually misinterpreted, as it were. And so now to John's comment, I faced a little bit of this when I went out to Operation Pegasus Jump this summer. It was a collective. I mean, it was a bunch of veterans, first responders, and law enforcement that were like-minded and were gathering together to focus on improving mental health and a variety of different things. It's a great initiative. It's a great collective. But I was very careful when I was there to not hang out too much in the elite subcultures that were there. Though I was a part of those elite little subcultures, I tried to almost keep them at further arm's distance than I wanted to, because I did not want to display that sense of elitism or that sense of excluding someone while only including my buddies. And that's that diversity and that inclusivity. And so to make my point categorically, I'll say this, that this summer I drove over 2,000 kilometers, spent a boatload of money with the intention of going out to Vancouver Island to do a pile of jumps with my youngest son, who was there with me. And I only ended up doing 2 jumps. And the reason I only did 2 jumps is because every time I went to do a jump, it was like this. Hey, Shaun, you got a minute? Yeah, I do. Every single day that I was there for the over a week that I was in that location, every single spare moment that I had was dedicated to anyone who said, "Hey, Shaun, do you got a spare minute?" Everything was subordinated to the individual that stepped up and said, "You got a sec." And what I was demonstrating to that individual was leadership by example. I was demonstrating how to do it right within a collective. I was demonstrating how to be inclusive and not divisive. If it was someone who walked up on me and I didn't know them and they kind of had a weird vibe about them, I still engaged. I still included them in the conversation. And by the end of it, whether it was a minute long or half an hour long, we were good friends. And so demonstrating leadership by example, demonstrating that it doesn't have to be that exclusive or it doesn't have to be that elite, I think is a really important aspect of anybody who is in a position of, we'll call it a paragon or a strong pillar within the community. You've got to demonstrate strength, but you've got to demonstrate vulnerability as well, as it were.
That is a fantastic point, and it's really neat. Doxy had to take off, so we appreciate his time. We're looking to see good. We'll look to see him again in the future. Always good to see him. And I do want to point out was the fact that not only did you take the time to make sure that the people at the event were heard, you were still here on the collective, still talking about stuff, still fighting through the problems of being a podcaster on the road and all these things. So I wanted to point that out as well, just because it is, you gave that week, which could have been rightfully so for you. Right? You could have taken it and been like, no, this is, I'm going to jump, I'm going to hang with my buddies, I'm going to do my thing for me. But instead, you took the time to spend that whole week for the collective. And I think that kind of goes into the point of being a social pillar, at least in that you're willing to make the short-term sacrifice for the long-term gain.
Yeah, but the spin-off out of that is, I don't want to suggest for a moment that I paid a small price or it was a sacrifice or whatever. I mean, I kind of said I drove a whole pile and spent a whole pile of money to not do the thing that I was going to go do. But it on the other side of the coin, my youngest son being there with me, Keegan, what he got to see was a bunch of my old buddies walking up and hanging out and chatting about things back in the day, things that my son has never heard before. He got to see guys come up and shake my hand and give that respect that he's never seen before, because that's not part of his life. It's not that I sheltered the boys from who I am, but I just didn't give them full access to what I used to do. I didn't help them understand that the brotherhood, the bond that I formed back in the day over the things that I did with my friends is like titanium strong. And it was good for my son to see and hear all of the stories that he saw and heard that week. He came away from that a man when he went there almost as a boy. And so that week to me was invaluable. So though I did sacrifice some of my goals, the team-oriented social task that I put on myself paid dividends, not just for the team, but also for me.
Excuse me. Allie, got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I think that's awesome, Shaun. I think to do everything that you did and to be a good leader too, it just takes a lot of self-awareness that takes time to build that up and learn about yourself and to notice everything. Kind of like you said, Shaun, it would have been just as fun probably for you to hang out with the elite club and do all that stuff too, but you knew going in that you were going to step back from that and engage some other people who maybe you wouldn't have in the past. And I respect the heck out of it.
Yeah, and the other piece is, like the as John stated, the small subunits of elitism. All of these titles that I own from the past, man, they don't amount to anything when the right person is standing in front of you. I met people that I didn't know that are way cooler than I am, that are way more qualified than I am, that are way more large and in charge than I am. I mean, there's people who just make, I'm almost embarrassed about how underwhelming or how underperforming I've been in the past, because some of them are just impressive human beings. And so, irrespective of how anyone categorizes, and this is not directed at John, John's point is absolutely valid. What I will say is that anyone who identifies people as elite and they are not willing to play with the non-elite, well, people who are elite do play with the non-elite, and those elite people usually gain more from the interaction if they are the right kind of elite people.
That's an excellent point. Now, we are just over time right now. Doc Carlos sends his regards. He does want me to say goodbye for him, so I will. But Allie and Shaun, great talking to you guys always. I really appreciate Allie you jumping on today as well. Great conversation, and we're gonna get you back on very soon. So be aware, because I'm coming for you.
I'll be ready. Do you want Dave to come on too, or just me?
Absolutely, either both of you at either one. I'm good. I'm
well,
happy.
it depends on if you've got two working mics. If there's only one working mic,
That'll be the key, yeah.
That's we're still working on it.
We'll have I'll have a little tutorial class for you. Don't worry.
Okay.
Any final thoughts on anything that we've talked about today? Social pillars, social resiliency, anything at all?
Oh, you're going to me first. I don't have my thoughts
first,
collected at all. No, I just appreciate being able to come on here and hang with you guys. It's awesome. I always learn a lot. I find I get really caught up in really listening to what you guys are saying, and then when it's my turn to talk, I'm like, I don't know what I'm gonna say. That was a good point when Shaun said, don't be in your head thinking about what you're gonna say in this moment. Just let it flow, because I'm still new to this, as you guys know, so I'm still learning as I go, and in 6 months from now I'll be hopefully doing it a little bit better, and I'm hoping to evolve as we all do.
Absolutely. Shaun, final thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with Ali. That's how I kind of started, and nowadays I don't even know what I said 5 minutes ago. I don't even know what we started the podcast with. In fact, Chance will confirm this, that sometimes I don't even know who we're going to talk to tomorrow. And when the conversation's done, I don't even know who I talk to. Because nowadays I find that the way for me to be the most authentically helpful is to just disappear in the moment. I try not to think about things. I just try to absorb, like accept the information in the real time. And then if someone says it's your turn to speak, then I just disappear and let it happen. And that's, at the end of the night, I have to review each podcast to see sometimes what I even said. Like, I'll watch myself and think, is that me saying those things? That's weird, because that's weird. But that's kind of where I headed myself, Ali, is I stopped thinking and I just started being in the moment and letting it unfold, as it were. So keep on keeping on.
Mm-hmm. Reps. Got to get those reps in. I do appreciate this too. Shaun, you mentioned this earlier, and I was going to get to it, and then I forgot. I was in the moment, but in the green room, a lot of the times when we're getting AARs done by everybody, and I ask, okay, how can we do this better? And immediately Shaun now he jumps in real quick and he says, first and foremost, I don't want to hear how good the show went. So tell me, how do we do it better? Because, as you said, Shaun, usually those AARs at the end of, in the green room at the end of the show are lots of just, yeah, man, that was really great. Ooh, nice and smooth. Oh, you guys do a really good job here. And we're both kind of like, yeah, but like, okay, great. That don't need to hear that right now. I need to work on how do we do this better. And I think that at the core of it, I think that is what social resiliency kind of is the desire to just do whatever it is they're doing right there better. And if they can keep that desire up and maintain that in the society around them, as you said, Ali, it starts to ripple out, right? That one person striving to do it better then has 4 or 5 people that they've inspired to do it better. And those 4 or 5 people become 10 people, and that becomes 20, and and we get force multipliers, just like the Ruck and Rise podcast. So this is this is what we do every day. We try to learn, we try to build, and we try to grow. And you can do that with us every day here on the Collective. We'll see y'all tomorrow. Chimo.
Chimo.
Bye.